a special presentation of LLBN with archaeologists Dr. Lawrence Garrity and Dr. Doug Clark. Excavating the Bible.
Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, what archaeology can teach us. This program is dedicated to exploring the contributions of Middle Eastern archaeology to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark, Director of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University in Riverside, California, along with my co-host, Dr. Larry Garrity, also a longtime archaeologist, former president at La Sierra University, and continues to work there in lots of capacities, including helping us keep archaeology going with our new center. So deep appreciation for that.
My pleasure.
You have some long and strong ties with Heshbon.
It's true.
Where do they begin?
They go back to my studies with Siegfried Horn during the time that he decided that he wanted to excavate. And he chose the site of Heshbon, and I was a graduate student away from Andrews at that time, but he had me come back, and we thought we were going to start in '67. The Six-Day War intervened. But we did get started in '68.
In '68. And I was able to join you when you had then become director, because Dr. Horn, for the first 3 seasons and the last 2 seasons of that first 5-year phase, or the 5-season phase, you were the director at that point. And then we went on to marry together too. As well.
Do you know how long we've worked together?
It's
been more than 40 years.
Now, there are different ways to define 40 biblically. I mean, there's the 40 years in the wilderness.
A generation, let's say.
Let's stay with the generation.
Right.
That's a better one. I like that. That's biblical.
Right,
So let's stay with that one. We want to talk about Heshbon for this particular edition, with some reference to the biblical connections, but we really want to focus on the scientific contributions. And we want to ask questions like, can doing good science contribute to this quest for biblical understanding and illumination and illustration? The business of doing archaeology today is so precise and scientific that almost forces some to say, you know, I wanted the biblical stuff here. I want this, but we don't get the biblical without serious scientific work, and so we want to think about that. The monitor shows 3 names for Heshbon, and the first one is Heshbon, and that comes from what language?
From Hebrew. It's Heshbon is English transliteration of the Hebrew word.
And that's the one that people who read the Bible would be acquainted with.
Right.
But the second one, Hesban, is Arabic. At least in the time when we were thinking not only of biblical but also of scientific sorts of things that informed part of this decision. And so,
and the village today is called Hesban in Jordan.
Hesban. And the volumes that we publish, and that came partly at your instigation, partly Dr. Sten LaBianca at Andrews University, and several others. It's Hesban.
That's right.
And so that name, it's Arabic, comes from the Arabic.
And these happen to be the final publication volumes. We've got 16 that have been outlined, and we're almost done through the years with our final publication volumes.
And that is 16 volumes from the first 5 years,
From the first 5 years, that's right. Every year we would put out a preliminary report that looked like this, with our studies within a year or 2 of having made the discoveries. These others incorporate studies that have been done over many years since.
Right. And by a number of different people.
That's right.
Contributing to this incredibly detailed understanding, scientific understanding, and historical and biblical of this particular site.
You know, the Bible is made up a lot of history, isn't it? And so it inevitably touches the historical study, archaeological study, and the linguistic study, and so on. So they do belong together, the Bible and archaeological background.
Now we're going to be talking about some new approaches that were actually instigated fairly early on in this whole enterprise that are going to take us in another than historical direction into anthropology and some other things too. Well, and then the third name here is the Modern Transliteration,
Yeah.
kind of a government-enforced change in the way the Arabic letters are
Transliterated.
to be transliterated, not pronounced differently.
No.
Pronounced the same.
No.
Although we're tempted to say Hesban and Hesban.
Hesban, right.
But in a sense, they're supposed to be pronounced
Right.
the same way. And these are all part of what we now call the entire umbrella project, several sites of the Madaba Plains project. Madaba being the central town in a large, fertile agricultural zone, the plains, the
That's
Madaba
right.
Plains. And we wanted to understand all of life in the plains, not just at one particular place.
You know, some people, when they finish a project, they go to an entirely different place, maybe in a different country or different culture. And we talked about that, didn't we, when we finished Heshbon? We said, shall we go to a completely different place, or shall we stay in the area? And we've really made it a lifelong project to stay in the area where we know the people, we know the history, we know the pottery and the kinds of finds that we're going to making. And so we've excavated several sites right in the region and really have become experts on that area.
You know, we do think of ourselves as knowing, I mean, we're very familiar with the area.
Right.
But others assess us as the experts
They do.
in
They
the
do.
area.
Yeah.
And part of that grows out of this 40-plus years of working together on a project that is regional, with several universities, people from several countries around the world, making it a collaborative effort, and in the process, learning more and learning it better and more precisely.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
that is certainly, and that's something we want to talk about in this particular edition of the program. But let's begin by thinking about this particular picture on the slide. It is an aerial view of Heshbon, Hesban. Now, this isn't the first one that was taken. This was taken later. In fact, this is taken in the springtime.
Right.
When there's some
you can
greenery
see some
there.
greenery there.
Tell us about the first aerial photo that we were able to get of Heshbon.
You know, we had tried for at least a couple of years to get permission from the Air Force to get an aerial view of our site. We told them we want to see it from the air. We'll just take off from the airport in a small plane, go over the site, take our pictures, and come back. But for some reason, security reasons, they were nervous about doing that. But at the end of one of our seasons, we had just finished up our work, and a helicopter circled overhead and landed on our dump, which is the top one right there, Area C dump. That's right.
Oh, this one.
That one, that's right. And it just scattered the, Area A dump it was. And it scattered dirt all over the site where we had just carefully cleaned for photographs, you know. So we were sort of upset. Who would do that to us? And out steps King Hussein. He had piloted his helicopter, and he says, "I understand you're finishing up your work. Would you give me a tour?" So of course we were glad to give him a tour, and we took him all around, talked about it, and so on. And we walked back with him to the helicopter, and he said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And so I thought of this aerial permission that we sought, and I told him a little bit about it. I said if he could put in a good word with us for us with the airport, with the Air Force, we'd really appreciate it. He said, "Do you have your camera?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, hop in." So there I was. We went up. He circled. We looked down. Took photographs, you know, of the site. He said, "Is there any place else you want to see from the air?" And I said, "Well, next we want to excavate at Jalul, you know, out toward the desert." He says, "I've never heard of it. I don't know where it is, but you point me in that direction and I'll take you over." So he took over. We got our first aerial sites of Jalul. He said, "What else would you like to see from the air?" I said, "You've been very kind." And so he brought me back to the dump at our site. But there's more than one way, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Get an aerial. Nowadays, we have our own drones. How times have changed that we can get all the aerial sites to our heart's content. Yeah.
I actually think that this particular photo was taken by David Kennedy.
Oh, yes. Okay,
I don't
that's
know
right.
if that's true, but he has taken a lot of photos, including of Jalul and of Ameri. So all the Madaba Plains project sites.
Richard Cleve also
and Cleve did it earlier.
Yes, right.
That's
yeah,
correct.
Yeah, so we've had several.
Right. Now, with this particular photo, let's think about the chronology of Hesban. Let's think about it. We've thought about the biblical issues. We'll come back to some of those, but from the beginning, we go back to about 1200 BC, time of the judges, and then we're going to go through later time periods. Talk to us about where we might find remains from those different periods.
You know, there are 20 layers of civilization built one on top of the other at Heshbon. As you said, starting around 1200 BC, so that would be the deepest, the one right above bedrock, and then going through time until on the surface would be our most recent Islamic era civilization. And so we have found them in reverse order, of course, from the way they built up, starting with the latest and moving to the earliest. But down here at the bottom, we called it Area C,
That's right.
is where there's a large Byzantine tower at the very bottom, fortification it looks like, and wall.
It's part of a wall system.
That's right. That's right. And then above that would be homes, domestic homes, that are built over some fairly large caves from the Roman period. There were cave dwellings that had doors and windows and second floors and so on. Very, very intricate and interesting. And our goal there was to get an east-west slice through a quarter of the mound. And then at the top is what we called Area A. That's the Byzantine church that's there. You can see the apse of the church right there, the sort of curve.
Right there is the front, the altar would be here.
And at the where the entrance would be to that church is an Islamic bath complex that was extremely interesting. Yeah, right there.
And a Roman temple.
And a Roman temple, right. And off to the right is our field B, we called it, and that's where the pool of the Song of Solomon that we talked about at our last segment. That's where we found that.
Pools of Heshbon.
Yeah, pools of Heshbon. Right.
So we're talking about these various layers. Now there's one that was really quite significant, involving an earthquake.
That's right.
And so we're talking about some fortifications up in this area, right?
Right.
And then actually extending beyond.
Right, right.
But
there was a large square, a kind of a caravanserai or something like that, in the Hellenistic period.
And so Greek times.
And Greek times, that's right, time of Alexander the Great. And there was a huge earthquake during that time that destroyed the pool of Solomon, the reservoir, and it went out of use. And so rather than having this large reservoir sitting there, perhaps children to fall into or animals falling into, they scraped the top of the mound where the church is now of the Iron Age city and the Hellenistic city, and then just dumped it into the pool, so that when we excavated the pool, we found things in reverse order, because you dig down and you expect to find the earliest stuff at the bottom and it gradually gets later. But because they scraped the top of the mound, the latest stuff went in first, and then the next stuff went in next, and so the very earliest stuff went in on top. So as we excavated the pool, we found it in reverse order from the way we usually find stuff.
These are archaeologists on their heads, because this is totally unexpected.
Right. But we know in geology, in tectonic theory, right, when there's a big earthquake, sometimes something falls over, and so you get the reverse strata there too. Yeah.
So then what we're thinking about, if we walk from the earliest times we know, the early Iron Age here, Iron Age here, there are other Iron Age discoveries over here. This picture was probably taken in the 2000s somewhere, and more excavation has been done. And then if we talk about the Hellenistic, the Greek period, and then if we move to Roman, the Roman temple. So we're talking about the time of Jesus, actually probably 2nd century for the temple.
For the temple.
Because we have a coin that comes minted with the temple on it.
On it.
And the name Asbus on it. It's good to find those.
It is.
Always good to find those. And then we're talking about the Christian church, the Byzantine church, and the fortifications Byzantine. So we're talking 5th, 6th centuries AD, and then Islamic, and primarily from what we call the Mamluk period. So we're talking about the 12th, 13th century AD, with a nice governor's mansion up here, and a bath, that nice bath, and so on.
And there may have been a mosque too, because we found a mosque lamp, although we never were sure where the mosque itself was located, but probably up in the same area.
Probably so, especially when you have a caravanserai like this, or a governor's mansion, you're going to have a place for worship. Well, when, or rather since Heshbon generated some questions for us about the transition between the late Bronze Age, the time of Moses, and the early Iron Ages, the time of the Judges. We've gone into some other kinds of studies, but there are a couple more biblical connections that we should make. This one we've actually talked about in one edition of Excavating the Bible, the Roman tomb, the rolling stone tomb. At least that's what we've called it. It's a descriptive term. And these various loculi inside, you can even see the pick marks, the trimming pick marks of the workers who created these. And then you could put the bodies in here, the flesh would rot off, you could move them around, you could actually put a large family in here over hundreds of years, generations in the process.
They would roll back the stone, bury, and then roll the stone back to seal it.
And then from several of these tombs at Heshbon are bones, lots of bones. And I'm putting this picture up here because this illustrates another biblical connection, and this was with the 78
season.
Excavation.
In 1976 we found this North Church, but we didn't get to completely excavate it. So one of our staff members came back in 78 specifically to excavate that church. And it was interesting that it had 3 layers of mosaic floors. One of them, the latest one, really beautiful, covered almost the whole of the church.
It was actually lifted and moved to Madaba. And it's in the Madaba Museum.
The interesting thing about this latest mosaic floor was it covered the whole floor of the church except for a circular area under the altar. And we know the altar was there because there are indentations for the 4 feet of the altar. And so we thought, well, we'll excavate that area that doesn't have a mosaic floor that's under the altar. We immediately came down on a very large rectangular stone that had a hole in it that had been cut. And in that hole sat a small stone casket with 4 horns on it. We took the cover of that off, and what was in there but an oval silver box that had a cross on it with an alpha on one side and an omega on the other. So clearly Christian symbols. And we took off that cover of the silver box. There was a human kneecap. So I can see why you put this slide up, because it illustrates that human bone that we found there. So I often ask people, what would a human kneecap inside a silver oval box, inside a stone casket, in a hole cut out of a stone, be doing under the altar there in the front of the church? And people don't think of this, but let's go to the book of Revelation, the 6th chapter, and the Revelator says, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before thou wilt judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth? Then they were given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren could be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So obviously what we had found was evidence for this early Christian custom. Martyrs would be buried in the churches, and as people came to worship from week to week, they would be reminded that there are the martyrs in a sense, their blood is crying out.
Right.
How long is it going to be before the Lord comes back to vindicate them?
Right, to
so
vindicate.
Christians looked forward to the judgment and to the second coming because they knew they would be vindicated.
No, it's a tremendous illustration of that very practice. And so let's then look at, I want to pause and let's look at what's on the tables, because we walked through the chronological periods, and these are not artifacts from Hesban, but they illustrate some of the periods.
That's true.
And so, Larry, you are standing by the Iron Age materials. Talk a little bit about that.
So in the Iron Age would be the period of the monarchy, the united monarchy, and the divided monarchy. So let's say from the 10th to the 6th century, 5th century, something like that would be the monarchy. And so you can see a typical little cooking vessel. This is called a Trefoil Mouth because of the three sort of portions of the like a dipper. Nicely burnished. Very nicely burnished.
Shiny.
Right. And here, this is sort of a flat pilgrim flask that you could put something in here and tie it to the side of your saddle or something like that, and it would be easy to carry. And so these are little dipper juglets of various kinds. This one has painting on it, which is extra beautiful. This would be a lamp with a pedestal on it. So when David in the Psalms, for instance, is saying that your word is like a lamp unto my feet, this is the kind of thing that David would have had in mind when he's talking about lamps.
Right.
And then we move to the Roman period.
We come over to Roman, and there are similarities in this ribbing that we call it between the Roman period and the Byzantine. So we're talking about, what, the 1st century BC, and if we go all the way through the Byzantine in the Palestine, Jordan area, we're talking about the 7th century AD. So we're talking about 600 or 700 years, and different kinds of vessels here.
Isn't this water decanter beautiful?
It is beautiful.
Yeah,
it is beautiful.
Very nice.
And then another cooking pot. Cooking pots are important to archaeologists because people keep breaking them, which means that then people keep replacing them, and in replacing them, they keep changing them. And so it's with cooking pots that we can actually define, sometimes down to 20 or 30 years.
That's true.
A time period. So we really like those. And then if we move over to these, we're talking about some lamps, another jar here, and then some lamps. These are typical, what we call Herodian lamps. They have this snout on them that is so standard for Herodian lamps. And these would be the types of lamps that the 10 maidens would have had. 5 of them wise and had extra oil. They don't hold a lot of oil.
They don't, do they?
So they wouldn't burn very long.
So it illustrates Jesus' parable perfectly.
It does. And then this very interesting pedestal lamp with 4 spouts on it, and with the burning indicated, with the soot on it. And then if we keep moving, so we're talking about up to the 4th century AD, and then we could move from the 4th century to about the 7th century AD, at least in Palestine and Jordan, with these Byzantine. So we're talking Christian. This is a time of Christian expansion. It's a time of expansion, population expansion. And so a couple of lamps, one of them actually has a little cross on it. I have to be careful. I'm standing around very important things, but one can see a little cross on this lamp. So one reads very well the indications and knows that that's Christian.
You know, another popular lamp from the period is in Greek, around the mouth where the oil goes. It says, "The light of Christ shines beautifully for all." A really nice inscription.
Oh, it is spectacular. And then an ostrich egg. I wish I knew more about these and could tell more about them. But they show up often in Byzantine Christian context, and symbolized Christ. I mean, symbolized resurrection, symbolized new life. Maybe somehow related to the first Easter eggs. That, if that's so, then we have a long, long, long tradition
We do, don't we?
to those Easter eggs.
Yeah.
But in any case, they were used, and the holes in them have some kind of symbolism. I wish I could tell you more about them, but I cannot. So the time periods we're talking about. Well, we have shifted in our work. I haven't shifted away from Bible, we've kept that.
Sure.
But we've also started to include wider anthropology studies about how people lived, about what they ate, about what they wore, about what kind of houses they lived in. And so you have an illustration in this painting, and I think this was done by Sally Hand, an artist, of a house, one type of house, a cave. Notice the cave, you have to think about a cave, of a typical Bedouin tent, and then more of a villa, a very nice villa. We know some people in Jordan who live in these nice villas. And so, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that some families would have all three types, you know, and they would choose in the summer to live in the tent because it's cooler out there, or in times of distress they might live in the cave with their animals where their feed is stored, or when it's winter and they need more protection they'll live in the house. But all three of those could be right contiguous.
They very much could.
Yeah.
They could. Caves, we don't think about caves.
Right.
Caves were used for living into the early 20th century.
That's right.
And if
People would hide from the tax collectors in
well,
their
that
caves.
was an easy thing to do, an important thing. Another painting here by Sally Hand of a cave with the top, of course, taken away to illustrate it, described by a Bedouin grandmother from her childhood.
Right.
And so you have the location of the fireplace, of the small animals. There are the larger animals. You can redecorate a cave a million times, and it's going to stay the same temperature. So lots of benefit. Again, studying anthropology, studying sociology, studying the sciences of human behavior.
Because the way people act and live and utilize their resources now may give us a hint as to how their forebears did in their time.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
So we study current societies who are doing similar kinds of things. And of course the tents. I mean, this is a great photo. It's an old photo and it's sort of washed out, but it's of a tent, and this is where the neighborhood gossip happens. And this is a churn for making butter and cheese and so on out of goat milk, which is interesting to the taste of Western of people, but in any case, it's important. Another tent, and hospitality. These are magnets of hospitality, which I think is one of the very nice things about Jordan society, Bedouin society. You are drawn to these tents, and we learn a lot about ancient tent dwellers by thinking about modern ones.
You can't walk into a tent like that without accepting hospitality. You have to have tea and coffee.
It is inescapable. Thank you, Larry, and thank all of you for joining us for this edition of Excavating the Bible. We hope the program has provided some enlightenment for the mind and some food for the soul, and we look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, keep exploring. For Excavating the Bible, I'm Doug Clark.